It is absolutely delightful to spend time with you on this evening in this conversation that everyone else gets to peer into.
And you're saying that after you've met me, so that's good.
Yeah. But no, thank you again for being here with us this evening. Shall we allude to the answers to some of these?
Absolutely.
So the first question was about favorite books. So are you going to disclose your favorite book? Or
Oh, yeah. Pooh. Winnie the Pooh. Years ago, when I started as a kind of fledgling writer, I started out by doing book reviews. And I am greedy about books. I'm horribly, 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 horribly greedy about books. I have about 8,000 of them. It ain't pretty. And so back then, as I was acquiring my 8,000 books, I would, as book review editor, you get free books. So I discovered that I could actually go to a publishing house. This is back in the 70s now. With a shopping bag and get books. And to my great delight, at one point I went to, I think it was Dutton, the publishers, and in a glass case at the entrance was Pooh and Piglet and Eeyore and Kanga and Roo. They had the original stuffed animals from A.A. Milne. So that
Sealed it for
sealed
you.
the deal.
So indeed, I am the person who is indecisive enough to have two books. Cicely Tyson's Just As I Am is such a remarkable account of what it means to live across time and space. And she does such an excellent job of painting these vivid pictures of critical moments or pivotal moments in her life. And so I'm a narrativist by trade, and so as such, I love a good story about someone's life. And then Bob Goff does an excellent job in Love Does of making love an action word. And so,
As opposed to a first name.
yes. And so I enjoyed reflecting on my own life and my way of loving up against some of the examples that he gave. So that was my fave. But the next question was about favorite musicians and or group. So I'll do the honors once again of allowing you to go first.
Oh.
Yes,
Okay.
share with the people what your musical preference is.
I said the Sweet Barbarians. That's a kind of bad translation. It's 4 singers from Bahia, Brazil, Salvador, in northeastern Brazil, that were referred to as Os Bárbaros Doces, the Sweet Barbarians. It was Caetano Veloso, Maria Bethânia. Maria Bethânia and Caetano Veloso are actually brother and sister. Gal Costa and Gilberto Gil. So they together formed the Sweet Barbarians.
Well, I chose Stevie Wonder. He is my all-time favorite artist. Everything that he does musically and vocally always moves me. So that was my choice. And now we're at the coup de grace of favorite food.
Well, I'm Oprah. I think everybody knew that. That wasn't a secret.
Yes. And I, again, am the indecisive one who chose a meal as opposed to a favorite food. But no, it's a reflection of me growing up in a multi-generational household. After my parents were divorced, we lived in a house with my grandmother and my uncle. And so my grandmother always believed that every meal should have all of the food groups. And so every week,
Colorful plate.
yes. And so every week she made something comforting, hence having to pull away from comfort food now at 45. But yes, I love a good meal with macaroni and cheese and yams. But let's
tell you a mac and cheese story.
Yes.
My mother, who actually, that was the thing I was going to say, I actually have a Greensboro connection, which people probably didn't know and which I didn't tell Beth, so apologies, Beth, I was saving this one. eons ago, back before it thundered for the flood, my mother was trained as a dietitian. And her first job was as dietitian at Bennett, under Willa Player. So that's what my Greensboro connection. She was there for about 2.5 weeks. She didn't particularly like it. And she said the only thing she learned was how to eat and cook grits. And that stayed with her.
Yes. Grits is a southern
Southernism,
tradition.
absolutely.
Yes. So let's dive right in. It's wonderful to have you here in this city. What number of visits to the Triad area, the Piedmont area, is this for you?
I think it's 2,
Okay.
but I could be wrong. I think it's 2. I was here, as you told me, in 2014
Yes.
to do a conference at UNC Greensboro.
Yes.
And I think this is the 2nd visit, but it could be 3. I could be wrong.
Well, whatever visit it is, we'll say welcome back.
Well, thank you, thank you.
And, naturally, the One City, One Book initiative is supported, as was mentioned, by the Greensboro Library Foundation. And the focus, of course, this year is this intersection of food and social justice, and, of course, lifting up the book, The Carolina Table by Randall Keenan. And it's a culmination of 31 essays that are about the intersection of food and story. And so, in your opinion, how important is it for libraries to be the hub of lifting up culinary narratives?
Well, I think libraries, first of all, I'm a library slut. If there is one, I'm going. I, for many, many, many years, lived around the corner, literally, from the public library in Oak Bluffs, Massachusetts, and every summer I would go to the library. And I did 2 things in the summer. I would go to the candy store, buy a quarter-pound fudge, go to the library, and it was back in the day where you would sign your name on a card, and so I could see librarians in the house going, churches saying amen. So you could see that you were rereading the book that you had read the summer before, and I would go and get those books, and I swear my bed had this sort of little hollow, and I'd get in the hollow of the bed with my fudge in the book, and my mother would go to the beach. It's like, no, I'm reading. So I think libraries at the intersection of life are important. I think culinary life, absolutely, and particularly probably more nowadays than before, because there is more culinary literature to say that. But I think just in general, they are hubs. They are community hubs for all manner and all sorts of things, and need to be reviewed as such.
Well, locally, I think that the libraries have served and evolved into these places of exploration, social exchange, in a way that's really meaningful. And I think that is what continues to push the life of the library, is that it is a place of evolution, and you can evolve there for as much as you immerse yourself.
But I think also that there are places of aspiration.
Yes.
And there are places of elevation. There are places where you can expand horizons that might not otherwise be expanded. And yes, I am fortunate in that I own those 8,000 plus books. But for those who don't, there are so many, many more than those 8,000 available. So they are there, and that's extraordinary.
It is extraordinary. It is about breaking down class and allowing people to dream from the same platform, to catapult from a similar space. When you open a book, everyone gets to dream the way that they wish.
They are levelers.
Yes. And speaking of this idea of social evolution, social change, social justice, how befitting is it that we're having this conversation about food justice and respect for the legacy of the diaspora here at the home of the city movement?
Absolutely. Now, what you may or may not know is I curated the cafeteria at NAMAC, the National Museum of African American History and Culture. And one of my great thrills was, of course, you know, the counter is in the Smithsonian.
Yes, it is.
So while they were building the African American, or some folks like to call it, you know, people don't accept the title, the Blacksonian. While they were building that one, we would occasionally meet in the other one, and I would always go and just gaze. And just gaze. It is, you know, food at the intersection of African American history is so pivotal.
Yes.
And what those then young men did, and the young women who did it with them, but who didn't get a statue, hint, hint, was transformational.
Yes. Well, speaking of transformation, I want to dial back before the books, the cookbooks, High on the Hog and all of that. And I want to start at your inception. You are the only child of a couple born later into their marriage. And in your memoir, My Soul Looks Back, you talk about the fact that at inception, your parents had aspirations for you and things that you would be able to accomplish because of the things you would be exposed to. And in some ways, mapping out to some extent a road for you to become whoever you wanted to be. How did that influence the path that you've chosen as an English and Romance language academic and some of your earlier career aspirations?
Well, several things. I think I grew up at a point in time when most striving, large quotation marks around it, Black parents were aspirational. It was always about, the church is not an amen in the front row there. Okay. Most folks were about, my kids have to have more than I have, do better, be able to have access to another world, a brighter place, a different thing. I was very much raised under that. He would probably roll over in his grave like a cement mixer, but I'm gonna out my father. My father did not have a college degree, but for my entire childhood, my father took night courses. The two most treasured books I have out of that 8,000 are my father's psych textbook and my father's Pushkin, because he took Russian literature. And my mother and I, we talked about it even when he was dying, because we didn't know until after he died. He didn't tell her. It was for him a source of shame. But what had happened was he was born and raised in Napier, Tennessee, which is 5 million miles from nowhere, and moved to New York City as a young teenager, went to Erasmus. My father had all of the aesthetic sense that anyone in the world could have. He was also a talented artist. Moved to New York City and decided he wanted to go to Erasmus because it was pretty. It looked like he thought a college or a high school or institution of learning should look. It was one of the high schools actually based on the sort of Oxford model.
Yes.
So it's a school with a quadrangle. It's high school. It's public high school in New York City. But the sacrifice that he made in going to Erasmus was that he was only able to get, a general diploma, not an academic diploma. And back in those days, there were all of those distinctions. You know, you got a general diploma, you got an academic diploma, whatever. Only people with academic diplomas could go on to higher education. So in order to have matriculated for all of those courses that he in fact did take, he would have had to admit it, go back and finish that. And that was not something he could do. So I think that that also is very much a part of what was the kind of propulsion under all of it. So actually when he was dying, and this may or may not be in that book, I'm not sure. The thing about books is I write them, I don't read them. So I have no idea what I said. So you tell me something I said, it's like, oh really? But he was actually in hospice care. And I went back and I had done all of my coursework and everything for the doctorate. Went back, thank God I had an amazing advisor. We buckled down, pushed it through. He came to my defense, and the proudest moment of his life was I have pictures with him. They took him off chemo so he could go. I have pictures of him seeing me march. I barely marched for my BA. I didn't for any of the others, but I marched for the doctorate, and he got to see it. So that was my gift to Dad.
Outstanding, outstanding. Our stories align in that way. My mother finished college and she shot for the sun. She actually finished high school at the School of the Arts in Winston-Salem, which back in late 60s into the 70s, that was, there's very low representation of African Americans. And so my mother, the consummate dreamer, who's actually on the front row.
Here present, as
Yes.
they say.
But the consummate dreamer, my father, on the other hand, he matriculated through a couple of years of college, but then right at the 9th hour, my very wise Caribbean grandfather said, "You will spend no more of my money to lean up against your car on campus." and so my father actually did not get to finish college, and it was one of those things that I do know kind of had a cloak of shame because he got so close. And so when I was finishing my doctorate, and for anyone who knows, a doctorate is about as close to a mental break as you will get. I actually not have one. And I was on the phone just crying one day, and my daddy, who did not necessarily even know to call it a dissertation, he stops me, he says, "Look, focus and finish the paper." I wanted to say, "Daddy, the paper is 300 pages," but that's not the point. But it definitely is, there's a pride, there's a sense of pride in paying forward.
Yeah.
Right? The thing that you know they stopped the world in order to help you accomplish.
We're gonna have a dad-a-thon now, because I got one more to tell you, which was my dissertation defense. I told you he came, and he and my mom were there, and he would periodically lean over to go, "Are they being mean to the baby?"
Well, the answer is yes.
Yes, they were.
The answer is yes.
The baby got the degree, and that was what counted. So yes.
You say something really that I think resonates with a lot of people, which is that there's no such thing as middle class for Blacks, only upper class aspirations for Black people with middle class money.
Well, it actually is pretty much a paraphrase of something someone named Hilda Stokely once said to me. She said, "There is no such thing as middle class Blacks. There's only middle income Blacks. The aspirations are always other."
How do you think that influenced hospitality in your household growing up, and then maybe for your own sense of hospitality?
Well, as I said, my mother was a trained dietitian. So when it came time, the church saying amen again. When it came time for party, between my mother's skills in matters culinary, and she was, until she died, my secret weapon, because she had a better palate than I'm going to have in this lifetime. She could taste food, say, "I think they got a little cumin in here, but maybe wait, there's a hint of this." She was good. And then she had all of the technical stuff. But so between that and my father's aesthetics, they rocked out on entertaining. I mean, before I was born, I don't know if I have pictures of this, but I have pictures of some of the parties they gave. But they gave like theme parties. She gave a baby party. and everybody had to come as babies, and there were prizes. One of her friends actually made Dr. Denton pajamas, you know, with the flaps in the back of the table. I remember for their 25th wedding anniversary, I think they turned our finished basement, that's a blast for the past for some of y'all, our finished basement into a cabaret. You know, checkered tablecloths, Chianti bottles with candles in them, the whole 9 yards. When Harry Belafonte was just starting, I found a calypso singer and gave a calypso party. So I mean, we entertained.
Yes.
We did that well, and it was, as was everything with my parents, a collaboration, a real collaboration. The only song that could bring my mother to tears was "You and Me Against the World." Every time she heard that, she cried.
So you have this extraordinary opportunity for exposure at the hand of your parents, whether it's to travel or entertain, to learn. And then as you're traveling along in your academic journey, upon returning from France, you land in this social circle of peers from your work that carry over into your personal life. But it's not just any social circle. You spent.
And it's not peers, it's one individual.
Okay, one individual.
Deserves credit for that, because there was one individual who was a door opener, you know. And he was. And he was from North Carolina. So he was from Durham, and his name was Samuel Clemens Floyd III. He happened to be James Baldwin's best friend. And so through Sam, who taught English with me at Queens College, I got to hang out with, you know, Jimmy and Maya and Tony, that's Morrison, and
Angela Davis.
well, Angela wasn't with that group.
She was with another
No,
group.
Angela was actually much later. I hang out with Angela now. But no, it was Toni Morrison, James Baldwin was the pivot. Maya Angelou, Toni Morrison, and Jimmy and Tony were kind of, had an extraordinary respect for each other's art, each other's. Rosa Guy,
Yes.
Louise Merriweather, Paul Marshall, and that was the nucleus. I got to be the tail of the tail of that little piece of rag that's behind the tail on the kite of their friendship.
But it is extraordinary to think about being informally placed. Not that the names that you mentioned, the assumption may be that these are more formal encounters, but no, these are evening parties and a record player going and a host of spirits from which to choose.
No, it was scotch.
And so to think about that I go to my friends' homes after work, and I have some amazing friends that I think are second to none. But to be in a circle such as this, in the name of informality, being casual, just connecting and being acquainted, how, if in whatever way, did that influence your sense of maybe world exploration or social justice work, activism? How was all of that informed by being in this circle in the name of friendship and camaraderie?
I'm not even sure. I mean, honestly, I'm not sure, because remember now, I'm 20 years their junior. So I think more than anything, that's what I was aware of. I mean, and also, they were who they were. This is not, well, I just discovered, you know how your phone suddenly sends you a memory?
Yes.
Like, oh Lord, was I there? So last week my phone sent me a memory. I have no idea where the phone dredged it up from or what it was, but it was one of the very few first articles I wrote when I was writing for Essence. and it's called "I Will Always Be a Writer." And it was an interview that I did with Toni Morris, and I actually talk about it in My Soul Looks Back, and it was published in December 1976. And the thing that was particular about the interview was, this kid, you probably don't know, well, some of you look like you got some barnacles on your back, so you might remember. But you have a little tape recorder, and you have to push the button, and you have to push record.
Yes.
Well, I got through the whole interview with Toni and hadn't pushed record. So there you go. That's how it went. But she was extraordinarily gracious. I walked up here with blank pad and pen because I now always take notes, so if the record button doesn't work, I can still do that. So I got the article written. She had just, at that point, published Sula. So that's how long ago it was. And, she was kind and generous and understanding. I've been very blessed about that.
Indeed. I think that one of the things in My Soul Looks Back that stands out in the name of your unpacking of friendship is your relationship with Dr. Maya Angelou. And the fact that you highlight these periods of time that pass and then you all reacquaint, periods of time pass, you reacquaint. And it's connected to food.
And it's connected to Greensboro, because yes, on that last trip to Greensboro, I didn't realize, I have no sense of geography in the States. Now, I can tell you how far Toul is from Paris, but I can't tell you how far Greensboro and Winston-Salem are. But I realized I was in North Carolina. I said, let me call. So I called, and she had a gentleman who drove for her. And she sent him to get me. And I went down to see her. And we had an amazing, amazing time. And because I'm always greedy, I called the next day and said, may I come back? And she said yes. And I, at that point, called the gentleman and organized the trip down and everything. And that was actually the last time I saw Dr. Angelou, so, whom I call Maya, but I'm being formal since I'm in her state. But I'd known her for more than 40 years.
You talk about this reacquaintance over food. Do we do enough of that today? Really allow food to connect and reacquaint us with one another as much as we should?
In a word, no. I don't think, I learned the word commensality. It is the communing together over food. Oh, we don't do enough of that. We don't do nearly enough of that. We are losing family dinner, which means we are losing manners, because, that don't sit with your elbows on the table. Then the famous thing I did, a series of restaurant reviews for the Village Voice for about 6 years, and it was called Table Talk, because my mother would say, that's not table talk. It's like, okay. Learning what you can and cannot talk about, and how, table talk, and all of those things, all of that kind of, you said intergenerational, multi-generational household, all of that kind of wisdom, in my experience, gets passed down at the table. It doesn't happen while you watch television, because you're watching television. People don't really, nobody's sitting around the fireplace telling tales anymore. So it happens at the table. And if we lose the table, then we lose it. The other thing about the table is it is not for nothing that peace treaties are all signed around tables, because we can transcend boundaries, cultural boundaries, racial boundaries, educational boundaries around a table in ways that we can't if we're sitting lined up looking at each other. So that the table as locus, as place, as spot for communication is of cardinal importance, and we are losing that.
You asked me in the green room, how long I'd been married, and I told you that I'd been married for 5 years. One of the most incredible things that came with that wonderful husband is that I have 2 bonus babies who are my absolute heart. And nothing does my heart better than for me to walk into the kitchen and find my mother with one of her granddaughters deep in conversation that lets me know I don't even belong in the room. Like, it's like chatter, chatter, chatter. But that is the heart of connection for our home. We can scatter to our different places, but that table is that place of intersection and exchange and of love.
Often the kitchen table as opposed to the dining room table. The dining room table is more formal.
Yes, it is.
Still there, but another, your spine straightens a different kind of way. That kitchen table is, is that.
So shifting gears just a little bit, looking more at this conversation about the influence of the diaspora on culinary arts around the world. And in your book, Taste of Brazil, you highlight, and I know that you will correct me the moment that I butchered this, but
Feijoada.
Feijoada, thank you. You highlight that feijoada was adopted as a national dish, which is, for those of you who may not know, it is a dish of beans and smoked meat. And they coin it a national dish, but they don't lift up the hands behind it or the lives behind it. And I wanted to know, in some way, is that what inspires your work? This idea that the celebration of things derived from African cultures are always devoid, or many times devoid, of credit. And is that what inspires some of your work, to give credit?
I'd be lying if I said yes. Because when I started, I didn't realize that was what I was doing. I was just doing. Sometimes you set your face against the wind and you don't realize the wind is actually blowing. But in hindsight, if it is something that this thing that I call my work has done, then I am deeply pleased. I mean, and the story behind feijoada is this. I'm moving this for a second because I can't see. Be it peek at you two and keep an eye on y'all because feijoada is the national dish of Brazil. It is a stew of black beans in which, or along with which, are cooked mixed meats. So sometimes there's something called carne de sol, which is sun-dried beef. Sometimes there are smoked pork chops, ham hocks, sausages. All of this is cooked with the black beans. It is then served with something called couve. Couve is strip-cut, collard greens in the States, kale, but a very different form of kale from the kale that we know, that's then stir-fried in olive oil and garlic. It becomes one of the things. There are sliced oranges, there's white rice. I was very much enjoying it, and there are multiple different variants of it. There is a variant with black beans in Rio, in Salvador in the north, which is where Brazil had most of its enslavement, not all, but much. It's done with black-eyed peas. But what happens is it's adopted as the national dish of Brazil. It's also the ritual food for Ogun, who is one of the Yoruba Orisha. I was sitting at a table in Benin, in West Africa, where a gentleman whose name was Monsieur Paraíso, because he was one of the people, or descendants of one of the people who'd been enslaved in Brazil, but who post-emancipation then returned to Africa. So there's a whole group of, Afro-Brazilians, if you will, living in Western Africa, mainly in Benin and Nigeria. And Monsieur Paraíso looked at me and he said, "You know why? Why are there mixed meats in feijoada?" I had no idea. And he said, because the slaves brought the leftovers from the family table. So this family had beef, that family had a ham hock, that family had everything. And so it went into the dish. Now that's important to know.
Yes, it is.
Most Brazilians don't know that.
Right.
Most people eating feijoada who visit Brazil don't know that. But it makes not only perfect sense, but it empowers those folks. It speaks to their culinary ingenuity and to their, just plain talent. And that's part of what I like to think I'm looking for now, whether or not it's found all the time. There's not always a Mr. Paraíso. Sure.
When you talk about empowerment, you mentioned in your book Beyond Gumbo that in some ways cooking was freedom work for women, whether it was social or economic. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, I think the whole notion of cooking, even today, let's back it up a little bit. We look at cooking today and we think of it in terms of, the summum of French food. Everybody wants French food, is this, that, and the other. French food is very much codified by Auguste Escoffier, who came up with the whole idea of what is now a professional kitchen. So Escoffier, being a good military man as well as a chef, designed the professional kitchen like a brigade, which is why in French it's called a brigade de cuisine, a brigade of the kitchen. And it is hierarchical. There's the chef, there's the sous chef, then there are the various different roles that people play and so on and so forth. But I contend that in France there are two different types of cooking. There is this very codified thing based on Escoffier, but then there's something called la cuisine bourgeoise. And that's women's cooking. So it's very gendered. It's very gendered, and we have adopted that gendering of it in the States with our adoption of things French. So that gendering of it removes women from the equation, but I contend that Escoffier went home and expected his wife to have dinner on the table. So there is that gendering of it. But the other thing is when we start getting across the Atlantic, men and women were not only cooks but chefs. There is a wonderful quote that I'm going to forget from Harper's Weekly, which basically talks about what was a prevailing mid-19th century American myth, which was like all black people can cook, just like all black people play basketball. So it was that kind of mythology at that level. Not only can they cook well. And it was because we come out of traditions of essentially seasoning. It's not so much about hot or spicy hot. It's about well seasoned. And that was appreciated by all palates. That being said, cooking was something that women could do on their own on occasion, for their own benefit on occasion. A little purloin piece of that, a little something of that, something, and then you've got some pralines. You can sell the pralines.
Right.
You can make money from the pralines. Down the road a piece is Charleston, South Carolina. You've got all of those salespeople who would hawk things in the street. You get coming with and out of that a whole tradition of street vendors and street food, and those Charleston street cries that everybody was so on about, that are also replicated in New Orleans.
Yes.
In New Orleans, there's a rice fritter called a cala, Kala is a name straight out of Western Africa. They actually serve rice fritters called kala in Bong County, Liberia, and Sierra Leone. So it's a West African dish. But all of those things allowed for women to have some degree, however small, of autonomy based on food. But along with that, you could start a business. What kind of business could you start? You could become a caterer. Because becoming a caterer did not take the financial outlay that opening a restaurant took. And it didn't take the time commitment, because you could take on this catering job or that catering job. And that still, prevails today.
Yeah.
So many African American women are caterers, because it gives a flexibility, it gives an ability to do other things and to handle time differently. But it also brings in income.
Yes. So the income being an empowerment source, transitioning to the idea of authority, just for a moment, there's a very detailed account in High on the Hog, where the site of the slave trade on the Senegalese island Gorée at the House of Slaves, you give an account of what it means to go through that passageway and what rested on the other side of that passageway, the stripping of dignity, etc. Do you think that being placed in charge of food once in America, in some way, covertly, restored at least a sense of value for some enslaved Africans that was diminished in that passing through of the door of no return? Being in charge of the kitchen, being in charge of the culinary experience in a way that most people eating the food had no knowledge of how to even prepare it. Do you think that that alluded to some covert restoration of dignity, that I possess this knowledge and this knowledge is essential in order for your daily life to carry on?
Yes and no. I think ideally it did, but I also think that it was a job, it was a task, it was horrific. Cooking, particularly open hearth cooking, is not an easy thing. If you know anybody who is an interpreter, natural fibers burn rather rapidly. Okay, you're wearing long skirt. You are dealing with pots that are heavy. There's a museum in New York, Francis Tavern, and the most sort of evocative exhibition thing, and it's very simple. They fill a pail with sand to let you know what the weight of the pot would be. So you think about all of that. Yes, it was empowering, but it was also serious work. And it was non-ending work, because you had to not only do it, you couldn't season it the way you wanted to. You had to season it to someone else's taste, and you never got to eat it. You never got to eat it. There are slave narratives of mistresses spitting in the pots after they were served, so that nobody would eat after them.
There's right before you go into a series of recipes and Taste of Brazil, you tell the reader, and this blessed my soul as a person who never, for some reason, I only read a third, maybe 2/3 of the way down in a recipe, and then I tell myself I've got it. I don't know if that's the only child in me that feels like I can do anything, include when I watch action movies, I'm convinced that I can operate a fighter jet the moment that I watch that scene. But I only read a little bit of the way. But what was sacred to me is that you said, if in the unpacking of the recipe, if you can't find every single African ingredient for the recipe, improvise. And so a part of me wondered, with those instructions, would you say that that guidance is rooted in this intersection of being African American and woman, to improvise in order to keep a thing moving forward? extracting it from cooking and applying it to life in general.
Well, I mean, I think it's a survival skill.
Mhm.
You know, you don't have this, use that.
Right,
The point is getting through.
right.
You know, what was it, by whatever means necessary.
Yes.
So getting through, I once made a cocoa vin. I couldn't find pearl onions, but I had some black-eyed peas. I put black-eyed peas. It wasn't cocoa vin,
Right.
but it was something. You know, it was something. So I mean, I think that whole thing, I can't follow my own recipes
Mm-hmm.
because I'm basically an improvisational cook. The hardest thing for me to do, and something I hate doing and have vowed to never do again, is write recipe. I do not. I mean, and I have had big arguments with, you know, culinary friends. Oh, but there's such an art to a well-crafted recipe. It's like, no. I am in the midst of finishing up what I promised God, please, Lord, will be the last cookbook. Not the last book,
The last cook.
but the last one that's going to require my writing of recipe, and I get notes from the editor. You say salt. Is it kosher salt? Is it diamond crystal? Is it, can you tell us what it's like? It's salt. Then we want to know butter, salted or unsalted. It's like whatever you got.
That's it.
Milk. What kind of milk? It's like, I mean, what kind of milk? Milk.
Right.
So I finally wrote a note, which, you know, right about there. Coconut milk, almond milk, oatmeal milk, soy milk, 2% milk, 1% milk, or just plain milk.
Right.
All will do. And, but we have gotten to the point where, because we no longer cook, we no longer know how to. If you read old recipes, they don't say, we need 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt and 3 grindings of pepper.
You feel your way?
They say season to taste.
Right.
What is, you know, my taste and your taste not the same thing. Dishes are gonna be the same anyhow.
But in the tailoring of dishes, you just spoke about how you had to tailor it to someone else's, you know, the preferences. But interestingly enough, that power dynamic was reversed on some of the slave ships in the grooming transition to the Americas. Some of the European sailors were many times forced to feed slaves better than they fed themselves, because the sailor's sense of value was reduced to the ability to keep slaves alive in the transition, and not only alive, but healthy. So do you, considering that dynamic, do you believe that to be the introduction to the more intense racial conflict that we sometimes observe between poor whites and blacks? Because you have to think about the switching of that dynamic, where you are superior until you have to keep this being alive that you're told is inferior, but they are of so much value as far as commerce that then you have to engage in self-denial in order to ensure their safe passage. Do you think that in some ways that fuels the dynamic of poor whites and blacks sometimes being in a more intense racial conflict than other dynamics?
You really don't want me to answer that.
Really do. Oh, please.
Well, my thought is, I think that much of the animosity, for want of a better word, or the conflict, or the however you want to put it, between poor whites and blacks is all politically stirred up. If you sit around a table, you are likely to find out that you're eating the same damn thing. And usually for the same damn reason. And if people could get over the politics of it all, imposed politics, one might add, and they might discover that, you know, same thing, you know, poverty is poverty.
Right. as we're rounding out our conversation, only a couple of points left. I want to ask the question based on a passage out of High on the Hog, where you talk about this idea that the civil rights movement increased awareness of diet in a really significant way. The awareness of what would keep Black communities healthy, what compromised the health of Blacks, and of course with the intersection of religion, specifically the rise of Islam in the United States for African Americans. There was this conversation about accepting or shunning Black cuisine. Do you think that there was a food shaming of sorts that was birthed out of these more intense conversations about food that's eaten within Black communities?
Okay, well, I think that there are about 3 or 4 different points in the statement. I'm not sure that the civil rights movement per se, and remember I said I write them, I'll read them. There you go. That it drove an awareness of African cuisine. I think what happened was that there was this extraordinary intersection of things that occurred in the 1960s. You had, yes, the civil rights movement, but you also had the varying independence movements in Western Africa and in the Caribbean. And I think all of those things together made people here more aware of what was eaten elsewhere. I don't think it was a direct outgrowth of the civil rights movement, no. I think along with that, you then get a whole nother kind of thing, and you say with the growth of Islam, but it was very specifically the Nation of Islam, which was at that point, and somebody is out there gonna shoot me now, somewhat different. In the sense that Elijah Muhammad has his own food thoughts. And in fact wrote 2 books about food and eating and what to eat. And demonized this and praised that. I mean, and that's why we get the bean pie. Because the bean pie was created because it was supposed to be a certain kind of bean that was easily digestible. And so there is that whole thing that comes with that, okay? Of course, haram, the rules of haram, which are, you know, there are things that are simply not eaten if you are Muslim, you know. So there's all of that intersection. Some of Elijah Muhammad's things come out of that. Some of them are very much his own. His you know, these things are digestible, these things are not, eat this, eat that, don't eat the other. And his palate very much tends to the sweet, the super sweet. So that's 2 things. Third thing, what was the end of the, demonizing. We are the only people who demonize our own food. I am not gonna eat that, you know, I don't eat swine. You know, I can't eat that, that's gonna kill me, I can't do this, I can't. Of course it's gonna kill you. You are not eating an agricultural laborer's diet. You get up every morning, you know, sort of slide your ever-widening backside into your car. So why would you eat, you know, 5 tons of bacon and eggs and, you know, grits and, you know, all of that? That's not what you do, so it's not what you should eat. But we don't make that jump. We just go into the, I'll eat that. That's gonna kill me. But it didn't kill your ancestors, which is why you're here. Okay, so my contention with that is not eat it, but save it for celebration of food. Understand that it is, you know, the old church song, How I Got Over, My Soul Looks Back. How I got over. That food is how you got here. That food is how you got over. You don't need to eat it every day, you don't need to eat it every month or every year, but you need to recognize that it is why you're here.
to round us out, we're in a day of culinary television, social media platforms that create this opportunity for palate expansion. If you can watch it, maybe you can recreate it, etc. But what are other recommendations that you have for exposure to other food cultures? What do we need to be doing today to expand our palate and to expand our food exploration, aside from gluing to television and or social media?
Oh, well, I don't think we should do either of those. So that's not an aside from, it's like, that's not necessarily the way to go. I mean, I think, again, it's back to the table. We tend to work often in offices that are diverse, whatever that means.
Mm-hmm.
What you got for lunch?
Mm-hmm.
Can I taste some? You know, what's that?
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the most important things, or most important in that sense, things that I ever witnessed was, I don't even remember where it was, but a group of colleagues gave a rice luncheon.
Mm-hmm.
And the only thing was, bring something for lunch tomorrow from your culture that is made with rice. And they sat around the table, and several things happened. First of all, they discovered a lot of really good food. But it was also, you use rice for that? Wow, I never thought of that. Everybody had one thing in common. Everybody knew rice.
Right.
But to see the ways that it had been inflected in varying different households was, you know, transformational and a revelation to many people. So I think the thing is to share. You know, there's a whole lot of stuff I don't like to eat. I had dinner with Beth last night. She now knows. It's like, you can have that. I'm not eating that. But I try everything. I don't have to like it, but I do have to try it. And that was what I was raised with. And I think that begins to get us closer. You know, I now can cook collard greens with olive oil and garlic because I've eaten Brazilian couve.
Mm-hmm.
And back to the earlier point, they're a lot healthier for me, and I can cook them much more rapidly, and I can have them once or twice a week and be fine. Now, I'm never going to give up ham hock. I have said that on my tombstone, if tombstone I shall have, it's going to say swine, but that's pretty much that.
Well, you are approaching a birthday.
Yes.
And with this trip around the sun, what advice would you give people who are still hoping that their passion turns into whatever rendition of success they imagine?
Do.
I love it. Dr. Jessica B. Harris, everyone.